My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 28, I've clawed my way to the top of a pretty cutthroat industry. I own Vance Events, a small but increasingly successful event planning business. We specialize in weddings, luxurious, over-the-top, Pinterest-perfect weddings. You might think that since I plan these elaborate celebrations for a living, attending my older sister Vivian's wedding would be a source of genuine joy, a moment of professional pride mingled with familial affection. You would be wrong, dead wrong. That night, beneath the glittering chandeliers and forced smiles, became one of the worst nights of my life. A slow-motion train wreck of humiliation and betrayal, and it all started with a dress that cost more than my first car. Vivian. She's 30 now, eternally 30, it seems, forever frozen in the amber of being the favorite. Growing up, she was the sun, and I was the pale, often unnoticed moon reflecting her light. Beautiful, charming, effortlessly popular. My parents were enamored. I was the sensible one, the quiet, academically inclined child who never caused a fuss. I blended into the wallpaper. It wasn't malicious, not overtly, but the message was always clear. Vivian was the star, and my role was to support the production. My parents' attention always gravitated toward Vivian's drama. The boyfriends, the fashion choices, the near-constant quest for the perfect Instagram life. My achievements, scholarships, internships, the slow, grinding work of building my business, were met with polite nods and a quick pivot back to Vivian's latest crisis. Did it sting? Of course, but I channeled it. I buried myself in work, saved every penny, and built something tangible, something mine, without a single handout. I proved myself again and again. And somehow, despite everything, I still held a thread of hope that one day Vivian would see me. Really see me. When Vivian got engaged to Mark, a perfectly pleasant, if somewhat bland, accountant, I knew the wedding would be epic. Vivian doesn't do anything halfway, especially when it comes to appearances. It had to be a fairy tale, a spectacle of white lace, overflowing bouquets, and enough champagne to float a small yacht. The kind of wedding that launched 1,000 Instagram posts and made all her friends green with envy. The problem? Vivian couldn't afford any of it. I overheard a frantic phone call between her and Mom a few months into the planning. The venue deposit is due next week, and I've maxed out my credit cards, Mom. Mark doesn't understand these things. It has to be perfect. The desperation in her voice was a familiar echo of my childhood. Mom and Dad, while comfortable, aren't exactly swimming in cash. They could offer a little help, sure, but nothing close to what Vivian envisioned. That's when the guilt, that insidious, ever-present guilt that always seems to worm its way into my decisions regarding Vivian, started to bubble up. I knew, deep down, that I should walk away, that I should let Vivian face the consequences of her own extravagant desires. But then, family. That damn, unbreakable bond, or perhaps, in our case, a gilded cage. I couldn't bear the thought of her having a mediocre wedding, knowing how much it would crush her. So, I did something incredibly stupid. Without telling anyone, especially Vivian, I started secretly paying for things. Big things. The venue, a historic mansion with sprawling gardens. The catering, a gourmet feast that would make Michelin-starred chefs weep. The flowers, orchids flown in from Thailand apparently. And yes, even the dress. A Vera Wang masterpiece that probably cost more than my down payment on my condo. I justified it to myself. I was experienced, I knew how to negotiate deals, secure discounts. I could manage the budget, make it all work. It was a gift, a secret act of sisterly love. I imagined Vivian's face when she walked down the aisle, radiant and happy. I'd bask in the reflected glow of her joy, knowing I had made it all possible. Oh, Eleanor, you naive, sentimental fool. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll admit. Picture perfect. Vivian glided down the aisle, a vision in white, her face beaming. Mark looked suitably awestruck. The vows were exchanged, tears were shed, and doves were released. Yes, doves. The reception was equally lavish. Guests mingled, clinking champagne glasses, nibbling on foie gras canapés, and making small talk about the weather and the stock market. I watched it all from a distance, a quiet observer, feeling a strange mixture of pride and anxiety. I'd orchestrated this, poured my heart and soul and a significant chunk of my savings into making it a perfect night. But a sense of unease gnawed at me. It felt fragile, like a house of cards waiting for a strong gust of wind. And then the wind came. The band launched into a lively rendition of September, and the dance floor filled with swaying bodies. I spotted Vivian across the room, surrounded by her gaggle of bridesmaids, all cooing and fussing over her. I decided it was time to offer my congratulations, to finally share a genuine moment of sisterly connection. As I walked toward her, a smile plastered on my face. I saw her face. Her eyes met mine across the crowded ballroom, and the smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, hard, what? Disgust. Contempt? It was like a switch had flipped. I froze. "What are you doing here, Eleanor?" she sneered, her voice cutting through the music like a shard of glass. It wasn't a friendly question, not even remotely. It was an accusation, a dismissal. The blood drained from my face. I just wanted to congratulate you," I stammered, feeling suddenly small and exposed. She rolled her eyes, a gesture I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood, each one a tiny pinprick to my self-esteem. "I don't need you here ruining my special day. You've done enough. Just leave." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. A wave of heat flushed my cheeks. Ruining her special day. What was she talking about? I wanted to explain, to defend myself, to ask her what the hell was going on. But the words caught in my throat. I was suddenly transported back to our childhood, to the countless times I'd been made to feel inadequate, invisible, wrong. Vivian's voice grew sharper, louder. "Get out of here. I can't stand you being here for another moment." The murmurs started. Heads turned. Curious, judgmental eyes focused on us, dissecting the scene. I felt like a bug under a microscope. My chest tightened, making it difficult to breathe. I stood there paralyzed, unable to comprehend the sheer cruelty of her words. My own sister, publicly humiliating me on the day I had worked so hard to make perfect for her, the day I had paid for. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Without a word, I turned and walked away. The whispers and laughter followed me, a cruel chorus accompanying my retreat. I felt their eyes burning into my back, each gaze a tiny dagger twisting in my heart. I stumbled out of the ballroom, blindly navigating the opulent hallways, until I finally reached the parking lot. The cool night air offered a small measure of relief. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and collapsed into the driver's seat. And then, the tears came. A torrent of pain, anger, and disbelief. I sobbed uncontrollably, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had sacrificed so much for her. My time, my money, my pride. And this was how she repaid me, with scorn and public humiliation. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The quiet, accommodating Eleanor, the one who always put others' needs before her own, the one who always cleaned up Vivian's messes. She was gone. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking with rage. I logged into my bank account and stared at the list of pending payments, the thousands of dollars still owed to the caterers, the photographers, the venue. A cold, calculating fury settled over me. Vivian wanted me out of her wedding. Fine. She had no idea what was about to happen next. With a deep breath, I wiped my tears, started the engine, and drove home. Tomorrow, I thought, the real chaos would begin. The next morning was a symphony of buzzing and ringing. My phone was vibrating off the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls and text messages from Mom, Dad, and of course, Vivian, each one more frantic and accusatory than the last. I rolled over, burying my face in the pillow, debating whether to ignore them all or face the music. After everything Vivian had said, everything she had done, I didn't feel like talking, but I also knew that my silence would only make things worse. Finally, with a groan, I reached for my phone. The barrage of messages was relentless. Mom, Eleanor, what did you do? The wedding was a disaster after you left. Call me now. Dad. Eleanor, we need to talk immediately. This is unacceptable. Vivian. You ruined everything. I will never forgive you. I rubbed my temples and groaned. Good, let her be mad. She deserved every bit of it. I wasn't the villain here, and I wasn't about to let them paint me as one. As I was dragging myself out of bed, the doorbell rang. I threw on a sweatshirt and went to answer it, expecting a package delivery or a neighbor. But when I opened the door, I saw Vivian standing there, in her wedding dress. Her makeup was smeared, her hair a tangled mess. The picture-perfect bride had transformed into a disheveled, desperate caricature. "What do you want?" I asked, folding my arms across my chest. Without waiting for an invitation, she barged past me and into my apartment. "You have some nerve," she shouted, her heels clicking furiously against the hardwood floor. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I shut the door and turned to face her. "Yes, I do. I stopped paying for your wedding after you humiliated me in front of everyone." Vivian's eyes widened in shock. "You're joking, right?" "Nope," I said, leaning against the wall. "The caterers packed up and left because they didn't get their final payment. The photographers stopped taking pictures. And the venue owner was probably waiting to kick everyone out the minute the clock struck midnight." "You're insane!" she yelled, pacing back and forth. "Do you know how embarrassing that was for me? The guests had no food, no music, no photographer to capture the rest of the night." I smirked. "Sounds like a disaster, but that's not my problem anymore." Vivian's face turned red with anger. "You're my sister. You were supposed to help me, not ruin everything." I took a step closer, narrowing my eyes. "I did help you. I paid for the entire wedding without you even knowing, because you couldn't afford it. And how did you repay me? By telling me to leave, as if I was some unwanted guest." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped. For a moment I thought I saw guilt flicker in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You should have kept your mouth shut and finished what you started," she muttered. "Not a chance," I replied. "You've taken advantage of me for the last time." Just then my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. It was a call from Mom. With a sigh, I answered it. "Eleanor, I don't know what's going on between you and Vivian, but you need to fix this," Mom said, her voice sharp. "The family is in chaos right now." "I'm not fixing anything," I said firmly. "Vivian made her choice when she threw me out of the wedding. Now she can deal with the mess on her own." "Don't be selfish," Mom snapped. "You've always been the responsible one. You can't just abandon your sister like this." I gripped the phone tighter, my anger boiling over. Selfish? I've spent my whole life being the responsible one. I've covered for her mistakes, picked up the pieces, and sacrificed my time and money. But this time, I'm done. Vivian can clean up her own mess. I hung up before Mom could respond. Vivian stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "You're really not going to help, are you?" she whispered. "No, I'm not," I said, my voice cold. "And here's a little advice. Next time you think about humiliating someone, make sure they aren't the one paying your bills." Without another word, I walked to the door and held it open for her. She hesitated for a moment, then stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Later that day, I tried to go about my business, trying to put the wedding disaster behind me. I even managed to get some work done. But just as I was settling in for a quiet evening, I received a message that made my heart race. It was from Mark, Vivian's new husband. "Mark, Eleanor, we need to talk. I found out something about Vivian, and you're not going to believe it." My pulse quickened. What could be so bad that Mark had to reach out to me, his wife's sister, the day after their wedding? Was Vivian hiding something bigger than her financial problems? Whatever it was, I had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a ruined wedding. With a deep breath, I replied, "I'm listening." I didn't have to wait long. Within minutes of texting Mark back, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I hesitated for a moment before answering. I was still reeling from the confrontation with Vivian, the emotional whiplash of her betrayal. Talking to her husband felt complicated. "Hello?" I said, my voice tentative. "Eleanor, it's worse than you think," Mark said, his voice low and strained. "I didn't know who else to call. Can we meet in person?" My stomach nodded. "Sure. Where?" "Coffee shop on Maple Street. In an hour?" "Okay," I replied. I agreed, hung up, and quickly changed into something presentable. As I grabbed my keys and stepped outside, My mind raced. What could be so bad that Mark had to reach out to me, his wife's sister, the day after their wedding? He sounded desperate. An hour later, I walked into the small coffee shop, scanning the room until I saw Mark sitting at a corner table. His normally confident posture was replaced by slumped shoulders and a tired expression. He looked like he hadn't slept. As I approached, he looked up and gestured for me to sit. "Thanks for coming," he said, rubbing his temples. "What's going on, Mark? What did you find out?" I asked, leaning in. He let out a heavy sigh. "Last night, after the chaos at the wedding, I went back to the hotel alone. Vivian stayed behind to deal with her family. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being honest with me. So I did something I probably shouldn't have." I raised an eyebrow. "What did you do?" "I went through her laptop," he admitted, his face flushed with shame. "I found emails, bank statements, and, well, let's just say Vivian has been hiding a lot more than her financial problems." "What did you find?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a series of screenshots. As I scrolled through them, my eyes widened in shock. Vivian had been using my money, the money I had sent to vendors for her wedding, to pay off personal debts and fund extravagant purchases. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, spa treatments, all while pretending to be broke. "She drained almost everything you paid," Mark said, his voice tight with anger. "That's why the vendors didn't get their final payments. She spent it before they could claim it." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "So she knew all along? She never needed my help, did she?" "She did at first," Mark admitted. "But once the payments started coming in, she saw it as an opportunity to splurge. She figured you wouldn't find out because you always clean up her messes." I clenched my fists under the table, trying to control my breathing. "I can't believe this. After everything I did for her, she used me." Mark nodded. "It gets worse. I also found messages between Vivian and a guy named Ethan." My heart sank. Ethan? Ethan was my ex. The one who had cheated on me. The one I had tried to forget. "What do you mean? What were they talking about?" Mark's jaw tightened. "Vivian invited him to the wedding. Behind your back. She wanted to set up some kind of accidental reunion. I think she thought it would be funny to watch you squirm." I couldn't breathe. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. My own sister had not only stolen my money, but had also tried to humiliate me by bringing my cheating ex to her wedding. "She's been lying to everyone, Eleanor," Mark said softly. "And now, I don't know what to do. I married someone I barely know." I sat in silence, processing everything. Vivian's betrayal was deeper, more calculated than I could have imagined. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. "I know exactly what to do," I said, my voice steely. "I'm going to expose her." That night, I returned home and pulled out every financial document I had related to the wedding. Bank statements, receipts, canceled payments, and proof of Vivian's lavish spending spree. I even included screenshots of the messages Mark had found. I compiled everything into a comprehensive file, a damning indictment of Vivian's deceit. Then, I sent it to a lawyer friend of mine, David, hoping to build a case for financial fraud. David, bless his soul, had always been a steady and supportive presence in my life. He'd seen me through countless crises, both personal and professional. I knew I could trust him to give me honest advice, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear. The next step was dealing with my parents. I knew they would defend Vivian, at least initially. They always had. But this time, I had irrefutable evidence. I had facts on my side. The following morning, I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. My mom opened the door, frowning. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past her and into the living room. Vivian was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, looking annoyed as usual. My dad sat in his recliner, sipping coffee. Vivian rolled her eyes. "Oh, great. What now? Did you come to ruin more things?" I smiled. A brittle, almost manic smile. Holding up the thick folder of evidence, I said, "Actually, I came to ruin your lies." Vivian's smirk faded as I dropped the folder onto the coffee table with a resounding thump. "What is this?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Proof that you stole my money to pay off your debts and fund your shopping spree, I said calmly. And before you deny it, I already sent copies to my lawyer. My mom gasped, grabbing the folder and flipping through the documents. Vivian, is this true? Vivian stammered, her face pale. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just needed help. I cut her off. You didn't need help. You took advantage of me. And if you think I'm letting this slide, think again. My lawyer will be in touch. My dad stood up, glaring at Vivian. You did this? After all the help Eleanor gave you? Vivian burst into tears. I didn't think she'd find out. I thought I could fix everything before it got this bad. I shook my head. It's too late for that. You made your choices. As I turned to leave, Vivian grabbed my arm. Please, Eleanor, don't take this to court. I'll pay you back. I'll do anything. I pulled my arm free. You should have thought about that before you lied to me. With that, I walked out the door, leaving her sobbing in the living room. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play unfold, and I was merely an observer. Later that week, I filed a formal complaint with my lawyer and began the process of taking legal action. Vivian's wedding disaster had been only the beginning. What she didn't know was that the money she owed me wasn't the only thing at stake. Her reputation, her marriage, and her future were all about to crumble. I wasn't the quiet, forgiving sister anymore. I was the sister who was done being taken for granted. And I was ready to make sure Vivian learned her lesson the hard way. A week later, the legal papers were served. I didn't witness it personally, but David, my lawyer, filled me in on the details. Apparently, Vivian's reaction was exactly what I expected. More tears, angry phone calls, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. But this time, I didn't pick up. I was done listening to her empty promises. Instead, I stayed focused on the legal process. David assured me that the evidence we had, canceled payments, bank transfers, screenshots of her personal purchases, would be more than enough to hold Vivian accountable in court. The charges weren't just financial. Vivian had committed fraud by misusing funds intended for legitimate business purposes, the wedding vendors. Meanwhile, the personal fallout was swift and brutal. Mark had already moved out of their apartment after discovering her lies. The wedding disaster, the financial betrayal, and the revelation about Ethan were too much for him to bear. The last I heard, he had filed for an annulment, claiming he had been deceived about her financial situation before their marriage. Even my parents couldn't defend her anymore. I overheard them arguing on the phone one night, my mom crying as she blamed herself for raising Vivian to believe she could do no wrong. It was a rare moment of accountability from her, and I almost felt a pang of sympathy. Almost. But the most satisfying moment came when Vivian herself finally broke. A few days before the court hearing, she showed up at my doorstep. This time, she wasn't dressed in designer clothes. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair unkempt. She wasn't the proud, spoiled sister I had known. She was desperate. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, can we talk?" I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face to revel in her misery, but another part, the part that still clung to a shred of sisterly affection, relented. I stepped aside, letting her in. She sat on the couch, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "I've lost everything," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Mark's gone. Mom and Dad won't even look at me. And now, I'm going to lose in court. I can't fix this on my own." For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy, but then I reminded myself of the humiliation she had put me through, the years of manipulation I had endured. "What do you expect me to do, Vivian?" I asked, crossing my arms. She sobbed harder. "I don't know. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I know I've been horrible to you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, don't ruin my life completely." I sighed, sitting down across from her. "Vivian, I didn't ruin your life. You did. All I'm doing is holding you accountable for your actions." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I know, and I'm willing to pay you back, every penny. Just, please don't let this go to court. If this becomes public, I'll never recover." I thought about it for a long time. I could let the case proceed, knowing it would destroy Vivian's reputation and likely leave her financially destitute. Or I could give her a chance to make things right. After everything she had done, I was torn between revenge and closure. Finally, I spoke. If you're serious about fixing this, here's what I want. I paused, gathering my thoughts. You'll pay back every cent you owe me with interest, and you'll work for me in my event planning company until the debt is paid off. No special treatment, no shortcuts. Vivian's eyes widened. Work for you? Yes, I said firmly. You'll see what it's like to work hard and earn your way. And if you ever try to take advantage of me again, the court case will be back on the table. She nodded slowly. I'll do it. I'll do whatever you say. The next few months were a whirlwind. I informed David of my decision to put the lawsuit on hold, pending Vivian's compliance with the repayment plan. He was understandably skeptical, but he respected my choice. Vivian joined my company as an assistant, running errands, making phone calls, and dealing with the same stresses I had managed on my own for years. She didn't complain, at least not to my face. I could tell the experience was humbling her in ways nothing else had before. She learned to handle demanding clients, navigate logistical nightmares, and even clean up glitter spills at 3 a.m. after a particularly disastrous bachelorette party. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And for Vivian, who had always lived a life of curated perfection, that was a profound change. During this time, I also reconnected with David. He had been incredibly supportive throughout the whole ordeal, offering legal advice and a much-needed shoulder to cry on. He helped me set up a legally binding repayment plan with Vivian to ensure she followed through. His presence was a constant reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are people you can rely on. Mark finalized the annulment and moved on with his life, leaving Vivian to pick up the pieces. My parents were still distant with her, but I could see that they were slowly beginning to forgive her. The constant drama that had defined our family dynamic for so long seemed to be subsiding, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. As for me, I felt lighter, more in control than I had in years. I wasn't burdened by my family's expectations or Vivian's manipulation. I had taken a stand, drawn a line in the sand, and it felt good. I was finally defining myself on my own terms. 1 year later, I stood in my office, overlooking the city skyline, reflecting on how much had changed. My business had grown, and I had expanded into new ventures, including corporate events and charity galas. I had even started mentoring young women who were aspiring event planners, sharing my hard-earned wisdom and helping them navigate the challenges of the industry. Vivian walked into my office, holding a file of client contracts. "Here's everything you asked for," she said, her tone polite but cautious. "But, thanks," I replied, taking the file. Before she left, she paused. "Eleanor," she said, her voice hesitant, "I just wanted to say, thank you for giving me a second chance." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a glimmer of genuine remorse in her eyes. Had she truly changed? Was she finally capable of understanding the pain she had caused? I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that people could change, that redemption was possible even for Vivian. I smiled faintly. "Just don't waste it," I said. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had been through betrayal, heartbreak, and humiliation. I had faced my fears, challenged my assumptions, and emerged stronger on the other side. This time, I wasn't just the quiet, overlooked sister. I was the sister who stood up for herself, who demanded respect, and who refused to be taken advantage of again. And I would never forget the lesson I had learned. Even family, the people we are supposed to trust the most, can hurt us in profound ways. But we always have a choice: to be defined by their actions, or to rise above them and create our own path. But even now, years later, I sometimes wonder if I made the right decision. Did I give Vivian a second chance out of genuine forgiveness, or out of a lingering sense of guilt? Did she truly change, or was she simply playing a role, waiting for the opportunity to revert to her old ways? Perhaps I'll never know for sure. But I've learned to live with the ambiguity, to accept that some wounds may never fully heal, and that some relationships may always be tinged with a hint of caution. I'm okay with that, because I know that no matter what happens, I can rely on myself, I can trust my own instincts, and I can always rebuild. Even from the ashes of a ruined wedding, that's the ending. It aims for a more nuanced, less straightforwardly happy ending, reflecting the complexities of family relationships and the lingering doubts that can remain even after forgiveness. Hopefully, this captures the tone and style you were looking for.